Hey everyone, Romeo here, a fellow Spanish language learner. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about how I should spend my Spanish study time. Not because I'm losing motivation, actually, it's quite the opposite. I have way too many things that I can study, and I think that's a problem a lot of intermediate Spanish learners eventually run into. When we're beginners, the path is usually pretty clear. We need grammar, we need vocabulary, we need beginner listening material, and we need some kind of structure that tells us exactly what to do next. That's why something like the 1 year to Spanish fluency tracker makes sense for the beginner stage. It gives you a limited set of resources, a clear sequence, and a way to stop thinking about everything you could be doing. But after about a year of serious study, things start to get a little bit more interesting, or complicated rather, because now there are 100 different things that can help you. We can read more books, we can listen to more podcasts, we can have more conversations, and we can study more grammar and review more vocabulary and write and shadow and do translation exercises and watch more native content. And the frustrating part is that most of those activities are not bad. A lot of them probably would help, but that's exactly the problem. Most Spanish advice sounds like it was written for someone with 4 or 5 hours per day. But what if you only have 1 hour? At most, two. Because that's the reality for a lot of us. We have jobs, we have families, we have responsibilities outside of Spanish, and a lot of us don't live in a Spanish speaking country. A lot of us don't even have to use Spanish at work. So the question that a beginner had eventually changes. It's no longer just what is the best way to learn Spanish, because now we already know how to do that. Now our question becomes, what is the best use of the time that I actually have to continue studying Spanish, considering everything that I now know that I still have to learn? Because it's usually after about a year of serious study that you realize just how far you still have to go. And you realize you still need to train everything: listening, reading, speaking, and studying grammar so you can keep important structures fresh. And recently, that's exactly what I've been thinking about. So, what do we do? For example, I was recently thinking about revisiting Destinos, not just watching it again. I was thinking about taking the entire series, converting the Spanish into English prompts, and then forcing myself to translate those prompts back into Spanish out loud. On paper, that sounds like a great idea because producing Spanish is a skill that we all need. And I still believe recall is one of the most overlooked parts of language learning. But then I immediately saw the problem. Destinos only contains the Spanish that exists inside Destinos. So then I thought, okay, well, maybe I should keep reading short stories too, because that would expose me to more vocabulary. But reading introduces new words. So then I thought, well, maybe I just need more vocabulary review. But then that'll be time that I'm not spending on speaking. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe I need more conversation practice. But then I'm spending less time listening. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to watch more Spanish shows. And before long, I had accidentally created a 5-hour study plan for someone who only wants to spend about an hour to an hour and a half per day studying Spanish. And I think many of us do this. Every activity solves one problem, but every activity also competes with another problem. Reading expands vocabulary, but it doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to produce those words. Conversation improves production, but it may not give you enough repetitions of the structures that you struggle with. And listening improves comprehension, but understanding Spanish and producing Spanish are different skills. Grammar explains structures, but explanation alone doesn't create automaticity. There is no perfect activity. There is no activity that solves everything, which means that eventually we have to make a decision. We have to decide what deserves our time, and more importantly, what doesn't. That's the hard part. Not choosing what to do, choosing what we're willing not to do. Because language learning is infinite. There will always be another podcast, another book, another grammar concept, another telenovela episode, and definitely another vocabulary list, which gives us another word we just don't know. And that's something I've been forced to accept recently. Every time I read a new short story, I encounter words I've never seen before. Every single time. At first, that felt discouraging because it reminded me of how much Spanish I still didn't know. But then I realized something. Spanish isn't the problem. Language is just huge. I'll be 46 years old in another week. I've spent decades building English. Yet, I somehow wanted to try to master all of Spanish after a few years. That expectation never made sense. My goal shouldn't be to know all of Spanish, at least not in the first few years. My goal at this stage should be to just become more capable and automatic with the Spanish that I already know. And that realization changed how I think about my study plan. Right now, my daily routine includes structured recall. As I'm recording this video, I'm on Volume 2, Day 6, practicing indirect object pronouns. And I know I've improved. Not because a test told me so, but because I can feel it. Certain structures just now come to mind faster. Certain decisions are now easier. And moving between time tenses is now much smoother. And my ability to produce Spanish has improved. I also continue working through each of the 74 episodes of the teaching telenovela series Español Sí. This gives me my listening practice, my reading practice, my vocabulary exposure, and vocabulary review. Together, those two activities alone hit a lot of the skills that I care about most right now, building both recall and recognition. Could I add more? Of course I can. I can always add more. But that's exactly the trap. More isn't always better. More is often just more. At some point, we have to simply decide what deserves our limited time. But before we can do that, we have to first identify our bottleneck and then build a study plan around that. Not around what sounds productive, not around what other people are doing, not around fear of missing out, but around the problem that we're actually trying to solve. A beginner's bottleneck might be understanding Spanish. Someone else's bottleneck might be listening to Spanish. But like I've already shared, my bottleneck is becoming more effective with the Spanish that I already know, which is why recall has become such a big part of my study plan. So when I don't have time to do anything else, I at least complete my daily structured speaking drills using structured recall, and I keep my vocabulary and listening mostly restricted to Español Sí instead of constantly expanding into new material, at least for now. And when you only have 1 hour per day, efficiency is not about finding more things to add. It's about deciding what you're willing not to do. And that might be one of the hardest lessons in language learning, because there will always be another podcast, another book, another grammar concept, another video, and another word you don't know. But if everything is important, then nothing is prioritized. So ask yourself this: if you only had 1 hour per day, what would actually move you closer to solving the main problem in your Spanish right now? Anyway, if this video helped you think differently about your Spanish study plan, go ahead and give this video a like. And until the next video, good luck on your journey to building more functional, usable Spanish. Peace.